Most pressing crisis for the moment in many American communities is an out-of-control situation at our southern border.
Well, the House has recently passed legislation, and certainly, we're moving.
Ohio Republican Congressman Mike Turner is chairman of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence.
The Republican-controlled House is working to both establish legislation that would secure the border by construction of the completion of a barrier, increasing border patrols so we could have increased security personnel, and of course, reinstitute requirements of stay in Mexico so we don't have people released into the country. What we see with this administration is that this is not just only irresponsible, this is intentional. This is the outcome that this administration wants, and unfortunately, it's devastating to both our country and to our communities.
Do you think it was an unforced error by President Biden lifting Title 42?
No, because he's had plenty of opportunity to put in place additional legislation, including to complete the policies that were put in place during the Trump administration that required the construction of the barrier along the border, also including the Remain in Mexico policies, ending catch and release. All of these things are choices that this administration has made. There are no mistakes that the administration is making that's resulting in this. There's actual calculated decisions and intentional policy.
You made reference to the Secure the Border Act in the House, which passed last Thursday with a 219 to 213 vote. However, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer doesn't seem to show much interest in it. What do you think it'll take for those in Washington to reach some kind of bipartisan agreement on some sort of legislation to strengthen our borders when Democrats continue to strike down attempts like this one?
Well, and again, that's an excellent example of how this is part of the Democratic policies that are having devastating effects on this country. This is intentional. Given the opportunity to pass responsible legislation that would secure the border, that would also stop this flow, this is an inhumane outcome that is occurring. People's lives are being ruined. It's incredibly risky trek that these people are taking, that this administration is encouraging this. They're empowering organized crime that is delivering some of these people to the border, and the Democrats should be ashamed that they have not taken any action to both protect this country and to protect these people. I think this is going to take the American public waking up and demanding action. You certainly are beginning to see it now that the overwhelming numbers that have entered our country have now begun to affect cities that are not just along the border. The hue and cry that you're hearing from cities like New York and Chicago of the burden that they have had, that Texas has had for decades, is beginning to I think, having an effect on the thought of the American public.
Another major issue in Washington these days is, of course, the debt ceiling, the government's ability to borrow more money. Obviously, you Republicans want to make sure there are some appropriate spending cuts before you authorize the credit card to go further beyond the $31 trillion in debt. But in your view, as someone who deals with intelligence matters, I'm curious do you think our adversaries are taking note as we seem divided over the debt ceiling and are potentially risking default?
I think what most people are confused about is how the president of the United States could continue to say that debt doesn't have anything to do with spending. I mean, you only get debt by spending. So the administration is thwarting what is a responsible debate on, well, what should we be spending? And how do we rein in spending in Washington that has had an effect that people have seen at the grocery store and throughout their lives, the effect of the out-of-control inflation. This is an irrational stance by the administration. I think people abroad and across the country are confused as to how the president could continue to say that spending is unrelated to debt.
Does this fight and or our growing debt help China gain economic influence in the world?
Well, I think our growing debt certainly does. And that's exactly why the Republicans are calling for spending cuts to lessen overall the debt that this administration is piling upon future generations. This really is a national security issue, and it certainly is an economic issue for every family in this country.
Okay, shifting gears, I want to talk about something you've been putting a lot of energy toward as the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, and that's our U.S. national security. You recently led a bipartisan congressional delegation to Jordan, Israel, and Egypt, where you spoke to key leaders and intelligence services. Why was this a priority for you, and what did you learn from these visits?
Right, well, right now, we're so focused on China and Russia and Ukraine. Our committee wanted to make a statement. By traveling as a group, we had over 11 members and staff that went down to Jordan, Israel, and Egypt to deliver the message that the United States is still incredibly supportive of peace in the region and that they are our allies and our partners, and we're going to continue to work with them. Their message to us overwhelmingly was that they need leadership from the White House. They're not asking for military aid. They're not asking for financial aid. They're asking for the White House to show leadership because there are so many threats in the region, with Iran continuing to be a destabilizing factor in the region, China attempting to gain influence, and of course the concern about the direction that Iraq could go, and the fact that the United States can play an important role in ensuring peace in the area in the future.
You touched on it a bit. I'd like to dig into it a little bit more about the China spreading influence. During your trip to the Middle East, did you get a better insight in terms of how China may be attempting to creep into the Middle East?
Well, one way they're trying to do so is the way that we're trying to thwart in the United States, and that is through technology. Their surveillance society they put in place in China, where through technology, through their telecommunication systems, they routinely spy on their own citizens. They're trying to export that into areas where both authoritarian regimes can utilize it to oppress their own people, but also to spy on our allies and for economic espionage. On our trip, we heard routinely people's efforts to try to push back on Chinese technology and Chinese infiltrating the telephone systems, the telecommunication systems. In addition, China coming in with money to support what is known as their Belt and Road Initiative, where they're trying to build infrastructure that results in debts to China itself.
Obviously, a grave concern for the United States is nuclear weapons proliferation around the world, places like Iran, China, Russia. Can you share your thoughts on how you believe the United States should respond to these nuclear threats?
Well, this certainly is an area that the administration needs to pay attention to. China is tripling its nuclear weapons inventory. You have Iran marching toward becoming a nuclear weapons state, and North Korea continuing to add to its inventory with its provocations being directly targeted toward our allies, South Korea, Japan, and of course the United States itself. I think certainly the administration needs to play a stronger role in doubling down on missile defense. We need to build out our missile defense systems for the United States, at the same time ensuring that we don't lose an advantage. China and Russia are building nuclear weapons that we have never even seen before, with hypersonic capabilities that really make the United States more vulnerable as those two nations become more aggressive.
An exciting thing about being, of course, chairman of a committee is you get to set the agenda and guide the committee forward on certain issues. I'm curious what the priorities will be in your leadership for the House Intelligence Committee in the weeks and months ahead.
Our efforts, as you just described, are first to turn this committee back to the issue of national security. It had been hijacked by partisan politics. We've done that. My ranking member, Jim Himes, has been a great partner in ensuring that our committee looks to, how can we ensure that we have the intelligence available to be able to protect the United States. Number one right now on everybody's agenda is supporting Ukraine in their spring offensive. I truly believe that they're going to have excellent success against Russia in this upcoming use of both German tanks and additional weapon systems, additional training that I think is going to be decisive in this outcome. Obviously, then trying to respond to China and Russia and working to gain additional insight into what's happening in Iran and North Korea, the United States can be prepared.
As someone with access to intelligence, to America's secrets, can you make a case to folks listening today about why it's so critical that the Ukrainians win, or at least, come out well with this fight with Russia?
Right. Well, this is a battle between authoritarianism and democracy, self-determination of peoples. We saw President Xi when he came and stood next to Putin. He said that we're trying to make change that hasn't happened in 100 years. And 100 years ago was World War I and World War II, and that was the battle between authoritarianism and democracy. And we won. And our planet was different because free peoples led. And their goal, Russia's goal, is to subjugate people, to take away freedoms, to return to authoritarian control over Eastern Europe. And Vladimir Putin has said straight up, this is not about Ukraine. This is about Eastern Europe. He does not intend to stop, so we have to push him back.
He is the chairman of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, Mike Turner of the great state of Ohio. Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Chairman, and wishing you a great week.
Thank you so much, you too.